All right. Hey, welcome to this demo. Here's what we're going to show. Tim is one of my colleagues, is a platform engineer. He has been asked by the company to provide the app developers and QA personnel with a self-service experience where they can bring up an RDS database at will whenever they want. Now, the company does not want the developers to bring up some random configuration in some random VPC. They want to have some controls in place, some guardrails in place. Specifically, they don't want these databases to be spun up in some random VPC or security group. They want these controls to be automatically enforced. So what we're going to see in this video is, as a platform engineer, how Tim can very easily set up templates which automatically enforce these guardrails. And we'll also in the end see what the experience for an app developer would be to use these templates and automatically provision the database and use it.
The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to use a utility to import all of the resource templates that we will be using. So first, I have a project here, this AWS demo project. We'll log into that. And we'll see here that there is nothing in the resource template section. So there's nothing in Environment Manager other than this one shared template from another project. In our Environment Manager repository, we have all of the Terraform and the setup utility and setup files. So the first thing we'll do now is we will import this repository into our own private repo. We'll give it a name and we'll be sure to select private.
And Tim, maybe can you just take 30 seconds to describe what's in this repository that you're copying over? Are these like the official resources that are curated and provided by Rafay?
Exactly. So there are multiple different curated configurations in this repository. We're only going to be using one of those in today's demo, and that will be the AWS resource repository. There's a set
as a platform engineer, Tim, does this mean that these are conceptually like Lego blocks that are provided by Rafay? And what you're doing here in a sense is assembling these Lego blocks, stitching them together to create a template of your choice. Is that kind of what you're...
That's exactly correct. So we'll be using 3 of those resource templates in total to create 2 environment templates that will eventually output a single fully built RDS environment. That RDS database will be using a newly created VPC and security group. The import is now complete. So we will go to our newly created repository, and we can see it has all of the same files as the source. We'll copy the endpoint of this new private repository, and we will clone it in our local machine. We can now see that we have the files locally. We will navigate to the setup directory. In this directory, it contains a script that will actually import all of these resource templates for us. It will also create a config context for the AWS credentials. as well as build a system sync pipeline that will be used for our GitOps operations to create resources in the future.
So Tim, basically what this is doing is it's you basically go from 0 to 100 miles an hour in terms of like complete setup of the automation and the pipeline needed. This is a Git connected automation pipeline that will get set up in that project that you were showing with everything needed. And we create everything from scratch. So the click of a button and complete infrastructure can get built out. Is that at a high level conceptually what happens?
Absolutely correct.
Let's see it in action.
So the first thing that we need to do before we can run this utility to import the templates is we need to modify the values file.
What you're doing here is you are personalizing it with your credentials and your Rafay org details.
Exactly. In this last section, this is the list of templates that we have available, and I'm going to uncomment the Rafay AWS resource directory here, and that will, by uncommenting it, that will actually build out or import these templates. If we were to uncomment these other directories, it would then create the resources in those directories. But for today's purposes, we're only going to be showing the AWS resources directory. Once we have everything configured, we will save the file and we're ready to run the script.
I see. So it's also creating a secret sealer. So any sensitive data written back to Git by Rafay would be encrypted, I suppose.
Correct.
So it's creating an agent. This agent is what? What is this agent for? What does it do, Tim? If you could show us in your org to set up a GitOps agent.
Correct. It sets up the GitOps agent, which is used in the pipeline and both in Environment Manager. It's what actually will communicate with the repository and execute any of the backend Terraform code associated with the resource templates.
This agent is essentially the conduit to the private Git repository. So this could be GitHub Enterprise on-premises. This could be or GitHub SaaS. It could be any of these. And the agent essentially is your way to synchronize back with Git and everything else.
Correct.
Gotcha.
In this particular model, the agent is running locally on my machine through Docker.
Yeah, so it seems to have created a repository. Is this another resource in Rafay?
Correct. So we can see the repository was created here. We're validating it to ensure that it is working with our credentials, and it is.
And now it seems to be creating a bunch of resources. These are the resource templates, I assume. Okay, got it. So it's loaded up all these things. So all these are connected, synchronized back to Git. And what the utility is essentially doing is loading everything in. These are the Lego blocks that are now available at your disposal to create an eventual system that will be an environment template for you.
Absolutely correct.
Oh, it's also set up a pipeline. So this pipeline is what connects it back to, this is the automation, keeping everything synchronized with Git?
Correct. Yep. We can see the pipeline was built out and it has had 4 successful jobs currently. And if we go back to our private repository and refresh that, we can see that the pipeline has built a directory for the synchronization back. And we can see the different types of resources that have synced back.
The source we saw that got created by the script is actually written back to the Git repository.
Correct.
Script, it's taking stuff from Git and allowing you to load and create all the resources in one shot. So the burden on a platform engineer, in this case, Tim, was all I had to do is put in my credentials and say, hey, I want these resources to be loaded. And one command later, you have everything ready to go.
Yep, correct. Very simple for the platform engineer to get started. We can now see the script or the utility has completed, and it has provided us with a few details around webhook configuration. We'll now go into our repository, and we will update the webhook configuration in that repo. And what this will do is this will allow, when we make changes in Git, it will send a webhook to the controller, and will notify the pipeline that a change was made in Git so that a synchronization operation can begin. So I will copy the details from the loader output, and I'll put them in the webhook configuration. So now that we have everything imported into the controller, the first thing that we will do is we will update our configuration context with our AWS credentials.
And these are essentially the means by which you as a platform engineer are basically saying, hey, please go configure stuff in my AWS account. Here are my credentials for that.
Correct. Yep, this is the authentication mechanism that allows us access into AWS. And what we have here is we have the two sensitive checkboxes checked, and that will ensure that these values are encrypted when they are written back. So at this point, we are ready to modify our resource template. And as mentioned before, we're using 3 resource templates in today's demo. One will be for the VPC, one will be for the security group, and the third will be for the RDS Postgres database.
I see. So these are the 3 Lego blocks that you're going to assemble together to create your environment.
Correct. So I'll first be updating the security group resource template with expressions that will point to the output of the VPC resource template. I'll go in and I'll create a new version. We'll give it a name. I'll go to the input variable section, and the first variable I'm going to be looking for is the VPC ID. I'm going to change this type to expression. And I'm going to update the value to an expression that points to the Rafay AWS VPC resource template. And the output is the VPC ID value. So this will be taking as an input the output from another template. I'll be updating. Next, we'll be updating one other variable, the ingress with CIDR blocks variable. We're going to change this value type to JSON. And we'll be modifying with another expression that is once again pointing to the AWS VPC resource template. Now that I've made those changes, I will save this version as an active version.
I see. So I just noticed something called draft. A draft here means I could continue editing it, trying it, and at a time when I'm satisfied with it, I can go from draft to active and publish it.
Correct. Yep, the draft state is just a very simple way to make changes without having to continuously create new versions of a template.
Perfect.
So now we'll be using our system sync pipeline to create our first environment template. This environment template will consist of the VPC and the security group. And the way to do that is I'll go back to the private repository. I'll go into the system sync pipeline directory. I will find my project. And I'm going to add a new file. I'm going to create a directory called environment templates. And I'm going to now give my new file a name. I'm going to now copy all of the configuration of this environment template into that file and be sure to update the appropriate variables. In this case, I'm updating the project name. Now, once that is done, I can commit that file. And if we go back to our pipeline, we should see that it has been triggered. So the webhook, the repository has sent a webhook to the pipeline. It has identified there's been a change in Git, and it is now updating the controller with that resource, with that to match the change in Git.
So all I did as a user was I authored an environment in YAML in my Git repo, and the webhook got triggered. Rafay picked it up in this project. And I assume in this case, has it already gone and created the VPC and security group in AWS, or is it just a template at this point in time?
Yep, no resources have been created in AWS at this time. It has only created the template right now.
I see. And where can I see it as a platform engineer? Where would you see the environment templates?
So first we could see that pipeline job completed successfully. So now if we go to environments and environment templates, we see this VPC and security group environment template was created successfully. Now we can launch this template to create this resource. And to do that, we can go to the Environments tab. And we can launch this template from here. We can give it a name. I will give it a name. We can select the version of the template. In this case, we only have one version. And we're provided with some different variables that we can configure to our requirements, such as region and subnets.
And these all come from that YAML file that was loaded into the Git repo. It's just reading that and presenting it.
Correct. So if we wanted, we could modify, we could create another version of that template and give it different defaults for these or other variables. And we can configure those variables to be displayed to the user if we want a self-service user to be able to modify those variables in this launch wizard.
Gotcha. So in this case, a junior platform engineer, maybe someone in operations, not a platform engineer, maybe an ops person or someone else who the platform engineer sets these guidelines, sets these rules and says, these are the defaults, please use this. You can't change some things, you can change some things. And then the ops person who maybe is responsible for creating these just has to like create an environment and create it, and all the rules get implemented automatically. Is that correct?
That is correct. So now that we have our configuration complete, we will actually deploy it.
So what's happening here, Tim? Like you just said, create environment. What's happening behind the scenes here?
So right now, the controller is talking to the agent and providing the agent with the appropriate instructions. Once the agent has the instructions, it will go out. It will download or pull the appropriate Terraform from the repository that is configured in the resource templates onto the agent. So it's going to pull that Terraform directly onto the agent and then execute that Terraform on the agent. And in this case, the Terraform will be building out a VPC and security group to the specifications that we defined previously.
If you have the AWS console logged in by any chance, could we see that those resources being created?
So the platform engineer has the ability to look at the output of the Terraform operation. And we can see the VPC is still being created at this time. Correct. So yeah, this is the output defined within Terraform that we're displaying here. And now I'm grabbing the name, which we can then search for. We can see the VPC was created.
Perfect. And as part of this environment template, if I'm not mistaken, we had two Lego blocks inside. The first one was the VPC itself, and the second one was the security group. Am I correct?
Correct. The security group is still being built at the moment. And because the security group depends on the VPC, we are able to add or define that dependency within the environment template.
Perfect. So what this means, I guess, is as an operations person who is leveraging the Terraform code, they don't have to make a mistake, accidental errors, etc. They like forgetting to connect the dots. The template takes care of it automatically. It's just a highly reusable component, and it can be used by anybody who does not even really have to have deep expertise in Terraform.
Exactly. So the environment has successfully completed.
In just 6 minutes end to end, this user was able to use the template that was published by the platform engineer with all the guardrails, etc. They were able to like simply, literally click a button and get the whole thing set up here. In this case, a VPC and a security group all connected together. They don't necessarily need to know the Terraform, but they were able to use the Terraform code that was published by the platform engineer. And all the code, I assume, is backed by Git. So everything that you're seeing here in the UI, I assume, is reflected in Git, like the new VPC and security group that were created. Would those resources be backed up in Git as well?
So here is the environment configuration that was just published.
Perfect. Okay. So fantastic. So now you have a VPC and a security group. And as we thought about this scenario here, I mean, our end goal here is to provide the developer a self-service experience where they can spin up RDS instances with certain allowed configurations. That's the next step, Tim, right?
Correct. In the next few steps, what we'll be doing is we'll be using the output of this VPC and security group environment, and we'll be building another environment template through System Sync specifically for the RDS database. And that template will use the output of the first environment. So it will take in as input the VPC and security group details. So to do that, we'll now go back into our environment templates directory, and we will add a file. We'll provide it a name, and we will enter in the configuration. Now, in this YAML, we'll update a few of the specific details to match our environment. So now I need the database subnet group name. I can get that by going to the output of that first environment and finding the database subnet group name. I can update that in our spec file. And then next we will need the VPC security group IDs. And I can once again get that from the output. Now that we've made all of the necessary updates, I can commit that file, and the system sync pipeline will pick that up and build that environment template resource for us. Okay, so now we'll go and we'll see if our environment template was created, and it was. Here's our RDS environment template. And now this template is available and ready to be launched by myself or other users with the appropriate permissions. And what we're going to do here is we're now going to create a group that only has environment manager level permissions to execute environments that are shared with them. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to create a group.
And this is essentially, Tim, at this point, you're creating the right RBAC, etc., for the app developers so that they can have a self-service experience to use this template to provision RDS instances, etc.
Correct. I will point them to the appropriate project, and I will give them the environment template user role. Now that group is created, I will add in a user to the system and then assign them to that group.
And if this was a user that has to come from the company's identity provider, the experience is identical. They just have to be added to the right group, and that's it.
Correct. I'll now assign this new user to the appropriate group. And they will be sent an email with an activation link to sign in.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So now one of our colleagues, Naveen's an app developer. He's the person who was added to the group by the platform engineer, and Naveen's logged in as an app developer. And he wants an RDS database, but he doesn't know Terraform, doesn't want to know Terraform. He just wants a database for his dev testing purposes, and he doesn't want to wait for an ops team to go and do this for them and take a couple of weeks to get it operationalized. So let's see what the self-service experience for Naveen would look like. He's logged in into the same org. Naveen, why don't you show us what your experience is when you go provision this RDS database instance?
Sure, I have logged in and I can see a project that my platform team has created for me. And when I navigate to the project, I can see templates that the platform team has created and exposed for me. And there's README as well. I can go take a look at what are the variables that I need to configure, what are the things that I need to do in order to spin up RDS environment that I need for my application.
And so
And
these are the
creating,
only inputs I need to worry about, right? There might be 100 possible inputs, but not everything is exposed to me. As an app developer, you're only allowed to make some changes, right?
correct, the variables that I'm allowed to configure depends on what the platform administrator has allowed the app developers to configure. So there'll be a limited set of variables that I'll be able to configure. And if I want to create a RDS database for my application, it's as simple as launching from an environment template. I can provide a name. Let me say test DB June 13th. I'm just providing today's name. And there's only one version of the environment template that's been exposed to me, so I don't have to change this value. And there are a couple of parameters that I need to necessarily configure. And let me do that. And then I just need to hit save and deploy.
And in this case, the same thing. You as a developer, you have no reason here to even, you don't even know this is actually being triggered using Terraform. You don't know, you don't care as an app developer, but it's
Exactly.
Terraform code that was created, curated, managed by Tim, who is a platform engineer. But you as a developer are not burdened with that learning curve.
Exactly. So I don't know what's driving this. I don't know how the IAC that's driving this is being updated on a continuous basis, etc. All of those things are not exposed to me. I can just focus on my job, which is just creating the necessary resources to test my applications, make sure that my applications are good, and I'm focusing on the core things that I need to focus on. I'm not thinking about the auxiliary things. There are things that are dependent that I'm dependent on, but I don't need to worry about any of those things because the platform team has completely abstracted that for me.
Gotcha. And let's look at if you could click on edit here, actually click on inputs here. You obviously selected some default inputs. If you just click on the show inputs for a second, these were some of the inputs you provided. And if you let's look at some of the guardrails that the platform team imposed on you. If you could just click on edit here for a second, and if you just click on the first storage, the 20 thing, and so in this case, looks like the platform team has basically said there are 3 allowed landing points for developers. So when you consume this via self-service, you can either use the 20 gig, 50 gig, or 100 gig option. They're not going to let you have a 1 terabyte option as an example, as a way to control costs. And then from an instance class perspective, they only allow some configurations. Again, this may be driven by cost controls. So people don't go land up provisioning some very expensive instance classes. So these are some of the guardrails that are possible. These are options that are exposed to Naveen, who is an app developer, may prefer to use a micro versus small for his app use case. There are other parameters that are not even exposed to the app developer because they don't know, they don't need to know, they don't care. So these are the guardrails that were automatically enforced and implemented with some overrides possible by the consumer of the templates. Now, I suppose provisioning an RDS instance takes a few minutes for sure. So I got to cut this out, I guess.
So here we can see if we go into our environments directory of our system sync pipeline, we can see the different environments that were created and written back to Git.
Gotcha. So if you open up the app test DB June 13th, the YAML, whatever input and overrides that were selected, those would be, like, for example, the storage that the options that they're presented to Naveen were 20, 50, and 100. He could only select among those 3. And then out of that, he picked 20 as a default. So as a platform engineer, you know exactly what the app developer picked up and selected.
Correct. We can see that more clearly here in the username. The value provided was his name.
Perfect. Thank you. So at this point of time, I think what we saw was, just to kind of recap what we just saw, Tim, as a platform engineer, started with effectively a clean slate. He had a Rafay project. There are no templates, nothing, no Lego blocks, which we call as resource templates. Nothing was there. He used Rafay's curated resource templates. These are like top 10, 20 resources for AWS, Azure, Google, etc. These are based on the upstream Terraform modules. So they are in sync with what millions of users use. And in just a couple of minor tweaks, he was able to load all these into his Git repo and connect it with resource templates running that script in his Rafay project. And then all the Lego blocks were ready for use. And then he went and set up his credentials so that anytime you use these resource templates, they would be created using the credentials that he had provided. Then he went and created an environment template. In this case, I think the use case he was pursuing was he had to use 3 of the Lego blocks. The first one was a VPC resource template. The second one was a security group resource template. And the third one was the RDS. And he had decided he wants to give the RDS template in a self-service manner for app developers, but they would just be consumers where when they go and provision the RDS, it automatically gets provisioned in the pre-set up VPC and security group. As you can see here, the platform engineer was able to get going literally in 30 minutes or so. They were able to very quickly assemble these templates and provide a self-service experience for the app developer to literally click a button and provision an RDS database. This is how fast an experience could be, should be for a typical enterprise.